Hello and welcome, star people. It is I, APM, your intrepid star guide and cosmic detective, and this is the Outlaw Astrology podcast. And today's topic is going to be on Aquarius, the revolutionary. And we stand at the threshold of revolution with Aquarius, the visionary, who disrupts calcified systems to give birth to new possibilities. Some housekeeping. We have the Daily Stargazer newsletter and podcast, both a free and a paid version. More information is located in the show notes link. We are on Pinterest, YouTube, and Instagram. Those links are also located in the show notes. And your listenership is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. And now we move onward. So I am APM, and we're going to be talking about this electronic and electric territory. And these insights are going to help us navigate the thin line between destruction and creation that defines the revolutionary's path. Okay, so let's talk about that lightning strike. This is the awakening. So the lightning strike is basically a symbol for the awakening. It is collective consciousness. And so the cosmic position of the revolutionary, and so Aquarius represents the third stage of the hero's journey, where one must transcend personal achievement to serve collective evolution. And this is the archetype that recognizes authority only when it serves humanity's highest potential, not merely personal objectives and tradition. And so Uranus and Saturn have a paradoxical dance. Now, Saturn was previously, in traditional astrology, Aquarius's ruler, guide. Uranus is the modern ruler currently. And so the Aquarius energy embodies both the radical nature of Uranus and the structured implementation of Saturn. And it creates a tension from which true evolution may emerge. So, and Cosmic Outlaw questions not only the external systems, but also the motivations behind revolutionary impulses. Is this revolution, is this rebellion truly progressive or merely reactionary? Because we all know and have been in contact with rebels without a cause, like the film with James Dean, 1950 something thereabouts, about 50, somewhere in the early 50s, because he died in 55. So in the early 50s, he did a film called Rebel Without a Cause. When they asked him what he was rebelling against, he said, "What do you got?" Because, that's the passionate teenage energy to early 20s energy. So that's very passionate embodiment. That is an example of the reactionary energy, rather than, say, an advocate, an activist who, for example, Rosa Parks, for example. Most people might assume that she just woke up one day and just stood up on the bus and said, "I will not have this any longer. I will not get up and give up my seat," when, point of fact, she'd actually been an activist for decades. And she didn't randomly stand up on the bus. It was part of a much larger plan. It was decided that she do so. Now, here's the thing. Other people had stood up on the bus, including in 1943, thereabouts, a 15-year-old girl stood up on the bus and said, "I'm not getting up." So it wasn't the first time this had happened. Other people, other femmes had done the same thing and said no. Other people had done it. It was just a more structured approach when Rosa Parks did it. She was chosen because she was the sort of person whom other people might relate to and might take seriously. We live in a culture that doesn't take young people seriously. So a young woman standing up at the age of 15 on a bus, even though it is revolutionary, even though it is a big deal, wasn't taken seriously. But an older woman with more experience and education and more seasoned, with hard-won hard-won knowledge would be taken more seriously, and which is why when the act was going to happen, she was chosen to be the person that did that, so that more people could benefit. So that was what we're talking about, progressive. And we're talking, if we go back even further in time, we look at Sojourner Truth, and we look at Harriet Tubman. This was not reactive. It was well planned. So here's the thing about Uranus energy. It's very explosive energy. It's like boom energy. It's a shock. It's upending. It's very progressive, yes. And it can look as if there was just an explosion out of nowhere. And yes, that can be true. But most revolutions are planned, and very well planned, and require systems and structures which are Capricorn and Saturn-like in order for them to manifest, in order for us to manifest a better future. So we need Saturn energy to manifest a future, because Uranus energy is about sweeping the slate clean. It's about blowing the thing up. It doesn't talk about, well, we got to build something in that space, or or should we build anything in that space? Should we let the land lie fallow, for example? So Uranus energy and Saturn energy are both very necessary impulses. One is not better than the other. We need them both. It's just how are they used, when are they used, and by whom are they used, and to what effect are they used, are the questions that cosmic outlaws and rebels tend to ask. So outlaw rebel mystics tend to ask those sort of questions because we want liberation. And by liberation, I don't mean the freedom to do as we please, to say as we please. Liberation means that everybody has a shot, everybody's needs and desires get met, so long as they are not harming or toxic to other people. It is creating the equality and the equal playing field that most of us claim to want, but we don't know how to build, or we're afraid of building it because we're not taught to divide, we're not taught to be disobedient, we're taught to follow rules and be agreeable. That means to put our other people's needs before our own in the hopes that one day this will work out. And so Uranus and Saturn is a paradoxical energy. One is meant to explode and implode things. Meant to explode things. Okay, that structure is going to crumble. Saturn is going to build things, and Uranus is going to bring those things down. That's impermanence. It doesn't mean that building the thing was foolish. It just means that things serve their purpose in the time, and then one day their purpose is over. And visionary Uranus knows that, and stalwart Saturn, that's a lesson that energy must learn. Whilst Uranus energy must also learn that just because something exists in tradition doesn't mean you need to get rid of it unless it no longer serves a purpose. Okay? And so, the lightning bolt is a metaphor. And there are lightning deities all over folklore. For example, Prometheus. Now, Prometheus was a titan who managed to survive from the Titan years, because the Titans are the giant gods that predate the Olympian pantheon in Greece, in ancient Greece. And Prometheus was a lightning bolt thrower, and one must also remember that Jupiter, also known as Zeus, was also a thunderbolt thrower. Okay? And so it represents sudden illumination that suddenly forever changes the landscape. I take you back to the tarot card, the Tower. It is like that sudden black swan event, way out of parameters, way out of what we think is going to happen. It's like the building that collapses and nobody thought it was going to collapse. It's the mind that has been there for 150 years that suddenly isn't there in 20 minutes. It is sudden, it is quick, and it forever changes the landscape. We can all think of moments in world history. And now you can pull one up from your own personal life, or one that is more from the mundane world, in which there was a sudden change, unexpected, shocking, that totally altered the landscape, meaning altered how we interconnect and react, because structures and systems are put in place because something unexpected and shocking happens. Unexpected death, an unexpected illness, an unexpected job loss, an unexpected financial setback, or the opposite. It could be a financial boon or blessing that we are not able to handle yet because it is so far out of our experience. So, true revolution, just to jump forward, isn't merely destruction for its own sake, but it's actually illumination. And it basically illuminates that the previous ways of seeing and the previous ways of being and doing are impossible to maintain. They are not scalable. We're not going to be able to do this anymore. And that's when you see the cracks in systems, the cracks in ideologies, the cracks in policy, because we've only built to a certain period and we are unable to know what we don't know and see what we don't see. Uranus says there's more to the mystery out there, and I'm going to put a crack in your foundation so you'll get a chance to see that, because we evolve through discomfort, not joy. It would be nice if joy helped us evolve, and maybe one day in about 1,000 years or so that'll happen for us. But for right now, it's usually because we're uncomfortable that we go, why am I uncomfortable? This used to feel so great. The job, the career, they used to feel fabulous. And all of a sudden, we get laid off. 2020 came around, and after that, and 2020, COVID. That would definitely be a lightning bolt moment. And it did shift things. How we're going to deal with pandemics, diseases, infectious diseases, that sort of thing. And it also changed how some of us work. Some of us ended up being remote workers, and some of us ended up finding out that we really don't want that because we need more connection than remote work can provide. So that would be such an event. And ever after, it exposed, for one thing, that we can't actually sit at home and do nothing, and even big companies at that point were struggling and in trouble. Okay, so that period of time exposed us to a lot of challenges about what's going on in our world. Supply chain issues, all sorts of things. And so I would consider that a lightning bolt moment. Lightning bolts are metaphors. They are what lightning deities use to provide illumination. Illumination equals wisdom, truth, or enlightenment, which is just another word for wisdom. Okay? So it's replacing whatever was before is over, and now we know there was a crack in our foundations. There was knowledge we didn't know. There was something we couldn't see or couldn't face. And now the consequences are the thing that we couldn't see or face is now very much revealed, and we are now forced to face it as a consequence of not being able to see it or choosing to ignore it. And so that lightning bolt is a metaphor. Now, Prometheus, you might remember, was a titan who gave light to humans, meaning he felt that humans were being oppressed and living in the darkness, and he felt that was wrong. And so he decided to upend the order of the gods and their power and authority by giving fire to humans, which the consequence of was he got tied to a mountain and had to be, tortured by having his liver eaten out by phoenixes, eagles, wyverns, what have you, dragons even, I've heard, and then having it grow back overnight, and the whole process never ending over and over again until he was liberated from his pain by the sacrifice of Chiron, the prince, the centaur prince, and also the most enlightened of the centaurs. Okay, so that's that story. And so that story tells us that, yes, awakening does happen. And yes, acting on that awakening is going to have very real consequences. You can get your dream job, for example, but you still got to upend the life you created here in order to live out that dream job in Milan or Paris or what have you. You know, when you reach out your hand to grab something, you have to actually open your hand. And sometimes you have to drop whatever's in there in order to reach out for more. So that lightning bolt is truth. It is wisdom. It is awakening, hopefully. Now, here's a shadow of this. Revolutionary energy is great. But let's talk about the shadow. So the shadow of the revolutionary, detachment versus compassion. So one of the seductions here, and you might consider seduction also to be like the devil card. I'm really into tarot right now. Just bear with me, please. The seduction of intellectual superiority. So let's delve into that Aquarius shadow. And it's basically the cool rationality disconnected from the heart. So the next sign up and the last sign of the zodiac will talk about heart wisdom, which is what Pisces has. So this is disconnected from heart wisdom, creating theories that sound progressive but lack embodied truth. And embodied truth would mean you feel it and you lived it. You know it in a non-linear way, and you've also lived enough and long enough and had enough hard knocks in order for this embodied truth, meaning that it is integrated into your life. It's not merely a cool theory. One of the things about the seduction of intellectual superiority with the visionary, revolutionary archetype with Aquarius is cool ideas that aren't lived ideas. They merely live in the head, but they're not integrated. They're not embodied. They're not ideas that you can live out. They're just cool ideas that are nice to think about, great to talk about, but never go anywhere. And that's what I mean. So currently, society's revolutionary movements collapse when we sacrifice humanity for ideology. And I pull back progressive, spiritually. I'm thinking about the People's Temple. And initially, when that started, I imagined that what people jumped on board is because it was going against the status quo of the late 50s and late 60s. Was highly conformist, not very progressive. You're grow where you're planted, even if where you're planted is a mud-filled swamp where you cannot thrive and it's toxic and painful. Suck it up and deal with it. That's the vibe I get from that time period. And along comes the wild late 60s, where people are opening up, they're studying other religions, they're going to other countries, they're exposed to other wisdom. That's very, very, that's Uranus and Pluto conjunct in Virgo at that point in time. So very advocating for a better future, advocating for different gender roles, advocating for sexual expression, free expression, that sort of thing. And so that's one of the movements that initially was a great idea. So I'm going counterculture. I'm going to get to the People's Temple in a second. So counterculture, number one. Everybody is going very Neptunian. Everybody's, free love. Everybody's trying psychedelics. That is very Uranus energy. That's coming from conformity to all of a sudden, boom. People are like, 1969, people are like, oh, you can get divorces now. Now you can leave people that you were stuck with. I mean, before you couldn't leave them. They had to agree. And what if they didn't agree? A marriage is forever, kind of thing. And that's tradition. And then someone decided, well, and I know who that is, but we're not going to talk about them right now because this is astrology. And I don't wanna. It's my podcast. So, the counterculture came. And it had brilliant ideas, great ideas, and they moved on into the 70s. But those ideas were a little naive. And some of those people suddenly they just went womp womp, and they just ran off. Some people hung on to the ideas, but others just became, they went and bought a house. They went and had kids. They got a job. They went and became part of the system that they were fighting so passionately against in the late 60s. Music, and philosophy and all of that was really in a hotbed, and it fell apart. Those ideals were wonderful, but nobody could figure out how to make lasting and impactful and progressive change. It was a lot slower, really slow, from that time period. So those movements collapsed, and those people became some of the very people that are now very conservative and are fighting to keep that kind of stuff from happening ever again. Okay? Now we go to the People's Temple. And the People's Temple was Jim Jones. In that ferment of cosmic energy, an ideal of creating an inclusive religion. We're putting aside Jim Jones and his many challenges. The ideal was progressive and a great idea at first, but it collapsed. Why? Because it came into the face of human beings. Because the authority figure was not interested in everything being better for everyone. They were interested in consolidating power amongst they and their cronies. That would be Jim and his friends. And that's how it collapsed. And so by the late 70s, what started in the 50s started to slowly collapse because it ran up against the shadow of cool-headed thinking, great ideas, without thinking about, are we reacting, and can these ideas survive outside of our heads? Can people integrate and embody this knowledge? How are we going to do this in a way that makes sense, that, doesn't oppress people and makes people equal? So two big ideas and collapse. And that does happen. So the next part would be the Freudian revolutionary. And this is the shadow that it's analysis paralysis. And it's creating rebels who are theorizing but never act. Those are those conversations, and I've had a ton of them, and I've stopped having them as much because as much as I enjoy having conversations about how to change the world, I'm at the point where I don't want to have a conversation about it anymore. I want to change the world. So I'm looking for steps on what I can do from where I am, my part of the revolution. I don't want to discuss theories. I don't want to read books anymore. I want to act. And so that's one of the challenges I've had. I mistook, personally, theorizing for action. And then got frustrated later when I went, wait a second, all that's happening is talk. All we're doing is theorizing. And I read a lot of blogs, I read a lot of newsletters where theories are abounding, but action not so much. And so I'm still in question mode where this is concerned, where that frozen revolutionary, I'm coming out of deep freeze to ask for my part. So Prometheus paid the ultimate price for the action, okay? Rather than remaining in contemplation, because Prometheus could have said, you know what, I wonder if it would be a good idea to give fire to humans. Let me think about that a little more. Let me see if that'll work. Now, if Prometheus had done that, human beings would still be in darkness, and the Olympian gods would still be running things, metaphorically speaking. Okay, it's basically giving authority an image, a picture. The Olympian gods were the image of authority. And if Prometheus had said, you know what, I'm just going to give him the fire, if he had said, let me think about that, let me go to a mountain cave and meditate upon this, and let me see what I think, and see what I come up with, and see if I feel like doing that. And so basically, this shows that true evolution requires vision, and decisive planning and implementation, and sometimes sacrifice, which looks like, most of the time, having to deal with the repercussions of our actions. And so Prometheus had to deal with the repercussions of his actions, which is that whole being chained to a mountain type thing. Because changing the world does come with consequences. It is not always comfortable. It is not always fun. It is not always delightful or enjoyable. Even if the change we're making is small, there's still going to be sacrifice and discomfort. And that means we don't always get to have it all, or at least all the time. You can have what you want, but not all of it all the time. We get pieces of it at different times, is how that usually works. And so, how we transcend that shadow, we can do so through community. And this is the revolutionary archetype, embracing Thoth's wisdom. Thoth being the god, the Kemutan god, who was the precursor, the proto-deity, before both Hermes and Mercury, which would be the Greek and Roman equivalents to that Kemudian, that would be Egyptian god. And so it's the wisdom of shared knowledge. It's understanding that no one person holds the complete vision for humanity's future, which is why whenever I see that whole one person changing the world in films and stories, I'm always, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm always like, I'm doubtful. I'm like, I don't think that's going to work. You know, an entire revolution that's contingent on one person's vision, one person's speeches, one person's words is a failed revolution. Because what happens if that person loses interest? What if they decide, I don't want to be part of this anymore? What if their ideals change? What if they, God forbid, goddess forbid, die? Now what? Now the revolution is going to collapse. So it is meant to be shared wisdom with everybody holding a piece of that vision for the future. Because liberation is found in collaborating versus isolation of that lone genius. And so sometimes you're going to hear, I've heard it described as the auteur myth. And by that it's like you usually will hear about some brilliant person. A brilliant artist, a brilliant singer, and I'm being very vague intentionally so that you can come up with your own vision of whom I mean. But that one lone genius, the person who does everything themselves. They played the banjo on their own record. They did all the background vocals, or they did the film, how the director is considered the genius of a film project. Film projects are collaborative. They're too big for one person to create on their own. So it's a collaboration of the talents of many people. This is why when you see the ends of films and TV shows, there's all those names. The director is the project head. They coordinate all the departments and all the talents to make certain that everybody who is working, we're working toward one goal, and everybody's talents are moving us in this direction. So that's kind of the auteur myth, the idea that there's a lone genius, that there should be a lone genius, and it completely ignores the fact that all records, all films, all books, all creative efforts at some point in the creation of that project requires people. So if you start a business, you still need clients, you still need customers. If you're a teacher, you still need students. If you're a writer, you still need readers. That's a collaborative effort. And that puts the lone genius story, it's a myth, in that it does not exist. People keep trying to make it happen, but it's not a thing. All creation is collaborative. It's a collaborative effort, and we have a tendency to ignore that as we laud one person above other people who have invested just as much time, energy, and their talents into a project. So, an example would be the film director, the writer of books, or the person who puts out records. That is highly collaborative. That person's name goes on the project, but there are people who write the songs. There are people who produce it, people who engineer it, people who master the product, people who promote it. It's very collaborative. And so the idea that just one genius is responsible for all of that art is a false one. And that is how we can transcend that shadow, is to be aware that collaboration is ideal, even though it may be just a bit chaotic, which is probably why most people don't want to do it. You can keep your vision pure if it's just you. When you add in other people, you add in randomness, which is a beautiful thing eventually, but is not always going to feel comfortable. And so this leads us to embodying the revolutionary's wisdom. And that is, first, we create containers for innovation. And what that means is establishing spaces where breakthrough thinking can flourish without destructive chaos, meaning you invite people to share, but you also provide limits and boundaries for them to do that sharing in so that everything is clear and we know what we're moving towards. So the mission is this, and the purpose is this, and this is what we're looking for, and then everyone can contribute. So I offer up, and this goddess is known as a Orisha, and you will find this air deity in many different lineages, which include Santeria, Hoodoo, Voodoo, and Voodoo. You will find this air entity, and Oya governs the marketplace and lightning, and can show how revolution can eventually manifest in practical ways, in practical systems. Now, other Oya is a Yoruban goddess, by the way. Winds, lightning, guardian of the marketplace, transformative change, and represents the Aquarian drive for economic and social contribution and change. And so we're looking for more practical systems. What might that look like? How might we experience that on a personal level? See, I'm not giving solid answers here because I can't. It's going to be different for us all. I'm merely inviting us all to think together and to think individually on how this might look like and how we might contribute. So we want to balance individuality with collective vision. So we want to honor unique perspectives whilst we all work toward shared liberation. That's the whole point for me. It's liberation. And here is a cautionary tale about that. Now, Lucifer is the light bringer, and in Christian traditions, brought forbidden knowledge. And this reflects the shadow side of Aquarian rebellion, because we can get disconnected from the heart-centered purpose, that we could get very, very highly reactive. And so Lucifer is that cautionary tale of brilliance without connection to the whole. It can be a story of liberation, and it also can be a story of questioning a powerful authority figure. So usually it's presented as a cautionary tale. Don't get too big for yourself. Trust authority. The authority has your best interests at heart. Don't push too hard. Don't question them. The consequences may not be to your liking. As an alternative viewing of that story can be also a story of liberation and questioning powerful authority figures. Do they really have our best interests at heart? Whose interests do they have at heart? What are those interests? And how can I be progressive about, how I respond to that? Because there is a response that is reactive and one that is thoughtful. And last, as I move on to technological innovation and humanitarian purpose, we're looking at a lot of AI everywhere, and you're going to get left behind if you don't get on AI. So this revolutionary archetype can be inventive towards solutions that elevate us all. And so AI can be useful and helpful. Can it replace human beings? No. Will it replace human beings? That's hard to say. I don't know. No one knows that for certain. But I want to question whether or not this progress serves humanity or is merely the people who create it. You see, ideally, and I am, at least in this regard, idealistic, I want to move more toward a Star Trek future rather than the Alien franchise future, okay? And right now, in my opinion, we're moving toward Alien, which I want to avoid, okay? I don't think we should go out into space, that's my Aquarian self speaking, without first dealing with the very real challenges that exist here for our species on Earth. Once we've done that, then we can start coming up with plans that make moving out into space from a place of equality and a place of compassion and kindness where everybody gets a chance to win rather than a very few loud voices. So I'm going to stop right here, and we're going to step away from the lightning field of Aquarius, and it's going to carry us to the understanding that true evolution isn't merely breaking systems down, but also creating space for what needs to be born, because you have to clear away the rubble after the destruction happens in order to build something new. And so the revolutionary visionary's most profound gift is the courage to envision what others cannot yet see, and yet stand firm when that vision meets resistance, because it will. So until next time we're going to dissolve into the cosmic ocean of Pisces, where boundaries between self and the cosmos blur into mystical unity. Until then, question your rebellions. Are they truly in service to collective evolution or merely personal reactions? Consider this. Wisdom often arrives in unexpected flashes, illuminating paths previously hidden. Okay, so once again, we're on. Outlaw Astrology is on Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube. Those links are in the show notes. And there is also a paid and free version of the Outlaw Astrologies, the Daily Stargazer podcast and newsletter. Those links are, and information to those links are in the show notes. And thank you very much for listening. May your revolutionary spirit remain connected to your compassionate heart as you continue your cosmic journey. I'm APM, your intrepid star guide. This is the Outlaw Astrology Podcast. Thank you for listening. Peace and astro magic.